So we would have to assume that there was an eyeball kind of thing there. Is it the same size as a human eye? Don't know. Probably not, because there's not enough room in the socket for a human-type eye. So it'd be, we don't know what it'd be. The eye is a real puzzle. As far as the nose, they're in the piece of maxilla, the upper right piece of maxilla, there is what looks like the outline of a partial nasal opening. So it would have breathed, we think, similar to us. As far as the mouth, and did it chew like us? It has a very small mouth and a very flat roof of the mouth. It's not arched. It's flat across. We don't really know what that means. Would it have spoken like us? We don't know. It's got a neck a third the size of ours. It doesn't seem like it would have much capacity for speech, if any at all. But since it has a brain 1/3 larger than a brain that size in a human, it could be that it was able to communicate telepathically. This is what the women claim, that these children don't talk. They communicate with them telepathically.
Let me ask you, that's interesting, because I know that the average human cranium has about 1,700 cc's.
No, about 1,400.
Or 1,400, yeah. And that actually Neanderthals had 100 more than that.
1,500, that's right.
And so if we have 1,400 for Cro-Magnon or modern man...
No, 1,400 for us, 1,500 for Cro-Magnon, and 1,600 for the Starchild.
Very interesting.
Now, keep in mind that the Starchild is the size of about a 12-year-old, so it should be about 1,200 cubic centimeters. So, given that, it has a skull the size it should be holding 1,200 cubic centimeters. It is actually holding 1,600 cubic centimeters. So what that tells you is it's got a third more brain power than it ought to have, and it's wall-to-wall brain, because you don't have all the room taken up by sinuses, and you don't have all the room taken up by deep eye sockets like we have. As you're sitting there, if you take
So this brain would have had a much larger frontal lobes.
Well, we don't know what it could have had. It could have had a 3-lobed brain. The way the head is shaped, it could have had 3 lobes instead of 2. I mean, we don't know. There's no way to really know that. There might be some very, very fine detail work that could go in, being tested from the inside if people got interested in it, if scientists got interested in it, but it's beyond what we can do, certainly, and it's beyond what we can pay for at the moment. But this thing, the Starchild isn't really going to happen big until we get some kind of compelling evidence that this thing is really special. Then every test in the world will be run on it. But for right now, we have to just kind of claw hand and mouth to get the money to do the testing that we can do and can afford to do. I mean, it would be great, for example, to get a clay sculpture made around a Starchild, a copy of the Starchild skull. Mm-hmm. We're talking just about $3 to $5 grand just to do that. It's not necessary. We need to do the things that are necessary, but when there's enough money on the table to do anything we want because we've got something that people are very compelled by, then all of those kinds of tests will be done. We'll have models made. Everything you ever wanted to know about the Starchild will be made, will be done, and will be learned. But until we can cram it down their throats and force them to do this, they are going to continue to ignore it because they don't want to deal with this kind of issue because it's so volatile.
Absolutely. It's a volatile issue, which brings us to the next thing. It's doing the funding and doing the science and getting the recognition for this, to me, are all stepping stones to a precipice, which is you get to the precipice and you are looking at a chasm of reality. In other words, we were not, as the Bible says, made by God. We were engineered. And it really goes to the core of our own identity as a species. And it is something that not only is ancient, but it's very modern. In other words, I can see this is not a 1-barrel shotgun. This is a 2-barrel shotgun. One, we have to say, A, we were bioengineered in the beginning, and B, we've never been alone since then. And they're coming back, and it is continuing on today if we're going to place credibility in the reports that you discussed about the women who report including being abducted, having their ova harvested.
Exactly.
So this is a double-barreled shotgun. I mean, this is a tough one. And the question is what, if anything, is going to set it off? What could pull the trigger?
Well, I think the Starchild could. In my view, there are two things that can cause enough of an upheaval to force the issue with science. And there are two things that I can see on the horizon right now. That is something like either the Starchild or the conehead skulls down in Peru, which I think are every bit as enigmatic and mysterious and need to be researched as much as the Starchild. Either the conehead skulls or the Starchild or both are proven to be definitively not entirely human, or a hominoid is captured or killed, or its body is presented for examination. That's Bigfoot again, or the Sasquatch, or the abominable snowman, or something like that. Because what will happen in either of those two events is this: if it's a hominoid, all anybody has to do is look at the pre-human fossil, the so-called pre-human fossil record, the early homos, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, all that, the Australopithecines going back to Lucy. Look at the racks of those skulls and compare those to a hominoid skull, and you see that those beings that are supposedly our ancestors were in fact the ancestors of hominoids, and that there is no human ancestor in the fossil record on Earth, clearly indicating that we did not evolve here, we were put here. So that's number one. Number two would be establishing genetically that the Starchild or the coneheads or both are not entirely human beings. And that would, be
that's
equal.
A tough one. I know you've been really pursuing the genetic aspect, and I know that you've hit some real tough brick walls because the labs that could do the right kind of testing won't give you the time of day.
Well, they wouldn't. We finally got one, a couple of young guys who had worked on the Kennewick Man and, done some other things, so they were a little bit more open to the idea of doing something, a little off the mainstream, and they were trying to establish their own lab. So there were a number of reasons that gave them enough impetus to do it, plus the fact that we promised them complete anonymity until they got a result, which they did, and posted the result on the website. So, but what they determined was at this point in time they could recover mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA of the mother, which is human. But we knew all along what we need is the DNA of the father, and that comes out of the nucleus. And right now in time, the primers that are used to do this work, that's the recovery mechanism, the chemicals that go in and recover the nuclear DNA, are not sensitive enough for the Starchild material. They will be sensitive enough in another year or two, so we have to wait a little longer to find out the ultimate determination of the DNA from the nucleus, which contains the DNA of both the mother and the father.
So you are confident that the actual proof you're seeking is in the skull. It hasn't been leached out and dried out.
They felt like it took them a while to figure out how to approach this bone because it's so not human. When they cut it, normally the way it works, Marshall, is you cut the bone, you put a little chip of it in a test tube with a chemical reducing agent that turns it into just liquid basically, and then you begin to work on it. Well, it didn't dissolve it dissolved some of the Starchild bone, but it didn't dissolve at all. I mean, 9 months later it hadn't dissolved at all. So they were treating it like bone. When they began to treat it like stone, when they began to treat it like a fossil, even though it's not a fossil, even though it's not fossilized at all, it's regular bone, but they treated it like a stone, then they began to be able to reduce it down and find what they were looking for, which was the mitochondrial DNA. And as they found that, they said, well, if you have the mitochondrial DNA there, it's almost certain that we're going to be able to recover some nuclear DNA as well. We just have to get the primers sensitive enough to do that. But in the meanwhile, you have, like I said earlier, all those conehead skulls down in Peru, and